Welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast with big new ideas about credit unions and conversations about innovative technology with credit union and fintech leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Quillo, the real-time loan syndication network for credit unions, and by your host, longtime credit union and financial technology journalist Robert McGarvey. And now, the CU 2.0 podcast with Robert McGarvey.
Is the country finally ready for a SAFE Banking Act that in effect legalizes cannabis businesses at the federal level? In recent years, multiple bills doing essentially that were passed by the House of Representatives, only to be buried in a Senate committee that never reported it out for a floor vote. There's a new House bill in play now, and this time just may be the charm, says Terry Mendez, CEO of Safe Harbor and a past podcast guest. Safe Harbor, of course, has provided the tools credit unions need to offer cannabis banking services since it opened in 2015. According to Safe Harbor, the current bill would bar federal banking regulators from prohibiting or discouraging banks from serving state legal cannabis businesses. That's the big change. By the way, the American Banking Association has come out in support of the act. In a letter to Senate leaders, ABA said the bill would, and I quote, provide important legal and regulatory clarity and address a significant challenge facing American businesses, our communities, and the banks that serve them. On the show, Mendez elaborates on why he really believes this chance is a good chance of becoming law now. Listen up. Is the SAFE Banking Act a big deal?
It is a big deal for Safe Harbor and for the cannabis industry. The Safe Banking Act has changed over the years, and the latest version of the Safe Banking Act we're still studying. But ultimately, we rely in this cannabis industry on a 2014 FinCEN letter. And now it's survived 12 years and the change of various administrations. But it keeps a lot of banks on the sideline when the rules could be pulled out, and it just takes a swipe of a pen, and then the banking committee can pull the FinCEN letter. And so today you have about 100 to 150 banks actively banking cannabis and attracting deposits. You got over 800 banks that are filing SARs. But many of those banks have onesie, twosie accounts, and they're not actively trying to have a cannabis program. It's a $38 billion industry. It's pegged to be $70 billion in the next 3 years. And there's 4,000 regional financials and credit unions, most of which sit on the sides. Now, I don't expect all 4,000 to jump in, but there are many that are sitting on the sidelines because of risk profile. You have a combination of things that are changing that risk profile. Credit unions live in riskier areas, but that combination of things include the federal rescheduling to Schedule III of medical cannabis programs. What that does is not only reduce the risk for medical cannabis programs, but ancillaries that service the cannabis industry in turn become a little less risky. What it also does is right now I think they just completed the hearings. By August, we'll know what the answer is. But it's likely that you're going to get adult recreational to be rescheduled to Schedule III. Well, Pfizer sells Schedule III drugs. Johnson & Johnson sells Schedule III drugs. AstraZeneca, SmithKline Beecham. And so now all of a sudden you have something that's Schedule III, no different than any of the big pharmaceutical companies. And why wouldn't you lend, and why wouldn't you bank companies that are federally legal? In essence, what it also says is you can't close somebody's account because they're cannabis, right? If you opened it, you can't close it because they're cannabis. You can choose not to open it. And so there's just a number of enhancements that come with safer banking that allow the total available market for Safe Harbor to expand exponentially. Our customers are financial institutions. So we have
you serve both banks and credit unions at this point.
We serve credit unions and banks. That's correct.
And my understanding is that roughly 150 credit unions are involved in some form of cannabis banking. Does that
That is
sound accurate to you?
credit unions or banks. I mean, but it's a combination. 100 to 150 credit unions and banks are serving the cannabis industry.
All right. All right.
Mostly credit unions.
And why mostly credit unions?
Because cannabis turned out to be a local thing. When we started our cannabis program all the way back in 2014, it was because Colorado said it was legal and the federal government said no. And we needed a way to have for people to be protected in the movement of money. You had people getting robbed on on the freeway.
Well, and some years ago, I interviewed Right Pat, a big credit union in Ohio that does cannabis banking, or at least it did at that point. And they told me they got involved in it because the state asked them to look into it.
So that's true.
So,
Ohio and Georgia, Virginia, people today, and probably them back in Ohio wasn't that long ago. Was that 2 or 3 years ago? Ohio went legal. Yeah, the states are going out and saying we need banks to bank these folks in order to get licenses. As a requirement for many license applications, you got to have a bank account. And so that's the emergence of it. But the original crux of it was the first few North Bay Credit Union, Safe Harbor, some of the others that started back in 2015. It was about doing the right thing for the community, and it's
well,
still,
that's why Right Pat did it. Is that
yeah,
they bought the argument that it's not necessarily a good thing to have all these people with guns and a lot of money involved in marijuana. Can't we just regularize this and put the money in banks, et cetera, et cetera? And they said, sure, it sounds cool.
yeah, 100%. So yes, that's the answer.
Now, is this potentially a case of be careful what you wish for, where suddenly some big banks might look at this and saying, wow, that looks really interesting.
It's very unlikely. So I've been
I
told.
know Chase so far is they'd rather get a skin disease than deal
Yeah.
with marijuana.
Well, Jamie Dimon came out and said publicly that he would consider it, but I agree with you. That's probably the right answer. Right. And that's the right answer for Citibank. It's the right answer for Wells Fargo. Bank of America is exiting their hemp business. And all the folks that might be rescheduled to schedule 1 or 3 for the hemp, they're losing accounts and they're looking for accounts. And so I sit back and I say, hey, I don't see the big banks jumping in directly, but I see consolidation happen. Remember, Glass House and Trulieve just uplisted to the New York Stock Exchange. Why did they do that? They did that in order to attract cheaper capital from retail investors to go consolidate and grow their businesses. And so Jason Wild from TerraSend came out publicly and said it's not a matter of when, if it's a matter of when the large MSOs all go public. The NASDAQ came out and said they would allow listings on the NASDAQ for the first time, just like a week or two ago. So you got the New York Stock Exchange saying yes. You're having the NASDAQ saying yes. You're having some of the largest MSO CEOs saying it's a matter of when, not if, they all go public on a liquid exchange. You're going to see lots of consolidation. And all of that consolidation is going to be what? Eventually, those companies are going to be critical mass and size enough that they could be acquired by a Coca-Cola or a Molson Coors or a Monsanto or, pick your consumer packaged goods company or your pharmaceutical company. And those are very healthy and profitable exits for shareholders and original investors. And then what happens behind the scenes, and I just talked to the Association of Cannabis Banking at a webinar last week, and I said, what happens behind the scenes is all of the companies that support those companies get bigger. That means the credit unions that are supporting the local payroll guy, the local accounting guy, the contract manufacturer that just does extraction, they need to evolve too, because they're going to be asked for bigger loans and larger orders are going to be placed because, these companies are now going to get bigger and bigger. You're going to see it similar to the automotive industry, right? You got a big 3, big 4 in the automotive industry, but you have system integrators that support them. And all those companies are huge and public. And so eventually you have the MSOs getting larger, and then the companies that support them getting larger, requiring more and more sophisticated lending and banking services.
Now, in recent years, the House has passed various versions of this Safe Banking Act, which
Mhm.
have been sent to the Senate, and the Senate has never put that on the floor for a vote.
Yep. So this is
Why do you expect that this time might be different?
it's politically apropos. It's politically what happened in the past. You had safer banking, you had safest banking, you had the States Act 2.0, States Act 1.0. But now you're seeing that a particular political party, in this case, the Republican Party, made something happen that the Democrats had promised for 4 years to do. They campaigned on it the first time, Joe Biden's campaign. They campaigned on it on Kamala Harris's campaign, but they didn't get it done. So now you have this odd situation where it's getting done by an administration that wasn't expected to support cannabis, and you have the supportive political party, the Democratic Party, suing to keep Schedule 3 from happening. It sends an odd message. You have the state of Massachusetts, a very strong Democrat state, having a referendum to reverse the legality of cannabis. You have the state,
Wow.
right? And so you have this weird juxtaposition of what came out of their mouths versus what the physical actions are. So now what you see is Chuck Schumer, which is the key. This bill is not sponsored by Chuck Schumer, but Chuck Schumer came out 2 weeks ago and was pounding the table that we have to get this done. Well,
Oh,
all of those
that's a change because he's opposed some past versions of this bill for
correct.
various reasons that were fairly murky in my mind.
And so when I saw Chuck Schumer come out 2 weeks ago and say this has to get done, I said, man, there's a real potential for this to happen.
Now, why is Massachusetts putting a referendum on to make marijuana illegal again?
Well, there's a segment of they got enough votes to put a referendum on the November ballot. I don't think it'll pass, but they got enough votes to do that. And so there's a strong segment of Massachusetts that feels that cannabis isn't right for their community.
Huh. Yeah, I live in Arizona where marijuana is legal and has been for a few years. And I don't hear anybody talking about it, pro or con. It's just
Yeah,
not
it's
that big a
something
deal.
in most states, Colorado, California, New Mexico, Arizona. I was the CEO of Nature's Medicine. You saw all those banners as you drove through the freeways of Nature's Medicine. We had 5 stores. The last one was in Fountain Hills and Tolleson and a whole bunch of other places. It's just like any other store. You choose if you want to go in there or not, right? But in some states like Florida and now a heavily, liberal state like Massachusetts, they're pushing back.
Well, then again, America did have alcohol prohibition, so anything's possible.
It's
It's
unlikely to pass. Massachusetts has a massive cannabis program. At the same time, it's hard to make money in Massachusetts, and you can see that there's, I think, 12 companies now that are in receivership or in some form of receivership that are Massachusetts operators. So not everybody wins. And maybe some of that is right, the fact that people lost money, maybe that impacts. I have no idea. I'm just guessing.
Hey, I lived in Cambridge, Mass, decades ago, many decades ago, and people thought marijuana was legal then. It wasn't. That, that was many years in the future. So, so you think this is going to happen in the Senate?
Well, I'm crossing my fingers. I'm saying little prayers. I absolutely want it to happen. It's bipartisan. Trump is supporting of it. That Schumer is supporting of it.
That sounds good right there.
Right now, you sit back. I mean, I've never heard them agree on anything, so that's the first time ever. But the hard part and the risk, the downside risk, is Tim Scott. And while he's a good soldier there, he's standing in the way of progress here. And he's the head of the Senate Banking Committee, and he's not a big supporter.
Oh, so he's the one who doesn't report the bill out of committee. I got you. Okay.
Yeah, potentially, right? But when you could overcome him when you got the president You got a bipartisan bill.
Oh,
And you
yeah, when you got the president in particular,
no.
well, he's very activist in regard to dealing with members of the House and Senate. So,
And so I think there's a decent opportunity, which is why I'm positioning the company the way I'm positioning it, because if that happens, one of the biggest issues for Safe Harbor, even though we've had like a checkered past, the biggest issue was how we went public and the lack of cash post going public. We didn't go public and raise a bunch of money. We went public and we were saddled with a bunch of debt.
right.
Right now, I've fixed that. In September, I got rid of all the debt. I have no debt at all on my books. And so now that that's fixed, the next step is I need to go out and market to a new population of potential customers. Well, the ones that bank cannabis already built their programs, some with and some without Safe Harbor. Some own it entirely. The only way to profitably start up a cannabis program, in my opinion, is through Safe Harbor. We built the platform. The platform works. We've been audited 26 times. We've done $36 billion of depository transactions. You just got to use it, as opposed to building it yourself and hoping you built it the right way the first time and you don't have regulatory issues.